Um, okay, Yehuda ben Tabai v'Shimon ben Shatach kiblu mehem. Yehuda ben Tabai omer, al tas atzmacha ka'orchei hadayanim. You shouldn't be a lawyer. Here they have in the translation they add a little comment as a judge. When you're a judge, don't act like a lawyer. Don't advocate for one side. You might, as a judge, feel like one litigant needs a little coaching, or you want a question because you feel like he's not necessarily like fully expressing himself well, and you want to sort of guide him. So even if you're tempted to guide one of the litigants, when you're acting in the role of judge, you can't also act as a lawyer who's advocating for either litigant. That's rule number one. This is one of the rules of Pirkei Avos, which seems specifically directed towards a judge, though some of the rules about judges feel like they could be applicable to other people, but in this case, not sure I see that. Number two, when you're a judge, kishayu bali dinim omdim lefanecha, yiyu beinecha kirishayim. So you should consider them both as guilty, because you want to be very skeptical, and you don't want to be naive as a judge, thinking that he wouldn't lie. I have to give him the benefit of the doubt. So that's great for life in general. But when you're a judge, or I would say even if you're judging a situation in life, in your mind, the way that you judge the person maybe should be to give the benefit of the doubt. But if you're trying to get to the proper judgment, be a little more skeptical and consider the possibility that they're both sort of in the wrong when you're the judge. But by contrast, the third teaching of the Mishna says, "Kisheniftarim milufanecha," when the litigants leave your courtroom, yiyu beinecha kizakoin. You should consider them both to have been correct, even if you uncovered some, negative things that you didn't expect to see in the litigants. You should take your judge hat off when you leave the courtroom and consider them both as righteous, as innocent, with one condition: as long as they follow the judgment in the end, and they follow the judgment, and whoever is obligated to pay listens to the judgment and pays. So do not let yourself be tainted by anything that you discovered as a judge in the case, but consider them both to be righteous people. I think that the point here is twofold. One is, whatever they did wrong in the past, they did wrong. Now, if they're accepting the judgment, let that be their tshuva and let them move on. That's one. Secondly, I think it's also very important in sort of like a religious thought that the judge has to wear a separate hat. That the whole idea of being a judge is really counter to what we think a person should do. A person shouldn't be judgmental. A person should always be dam l'kaf zchus. A person should always don't judge someone until you're in their shoes. So they do something that seems wrong, but you don't really know what it's like for them. So in life, we try not to judge other people, but alas, when a person's a judge, he's forced to judge, and the judge should sort of feel like I'm fulfilling this role as judge, but I'm not being judgmental as a person. I'm just sort of following the job that I have to fulfill because society needs judges. The Ramban really elaborates on this theme in a beautiful way, where he says that the Torah says, Ki mishpat leilo kimhu, that judgment is reserved for God. And the Torah often calls judges by Elokim. Some people might say it's Elohim because it's the word Elohim is referring to the judges. So v'nikra balabayit el Elohim, he's coming to approach the judge, who's a leader, who's called Elohim. But the Ramban says that it's written this way because it's really Elokim, and it's really God who's judging through the mouths of the judges who follow God's instructions about how to rule in all given circumstances. And the judges should feel that God is really here judging through us, because judgment is really reserved for God. And we can only judge by following God's instructions and letting his judgment come through the mouths of the judges. So in that sense, as soon as the litigants leave, they're both righteous, because you're not a judge anymore and you're looking at them as righteous people. While you're functioning as a judge, in order to do that job properly, you have to consider them both Rishoyim, but that's only with the judge hat and not with a regular hat. The next Mishnah also is directed towards the second of the Zug, Shem Ben Shetach, has a second teaching, which is also directed towards judges. We're supposed to give questions for the witnesses as interrogation. So give a lot of questions. Ask a lot of questions, because you think, you basically got the story, and then you keep probing and asking different questions, and sometimes a whole different picture could emerge. And Havizahir b'dvarecha shema mitocham yilamdu l'shaker. Be very careful with your questions, because maybe the witness will learn from your questions how to lie, because they'll realize maybe what you're looking for, or the question will sort of be leading or indicating what the answer should be. So be very careful with the way you frame your questions, especially when you ask a lot of questions, which you're supposed to do. Ask a lot of questions, but be very careful with how you formulate your questions. I don't think this was the intent of the Mishnah, but I think there's a lesson for teachers. First of all, when you give a test, you always want to ask a lot of questions, because sometimes they don't know one thing and they lose 20 points. They have a lot of questions worth very few points, and you can really find out what everyone knows. And make sure you don't give away the answer to one question in another question that you wrote, which I remember discovering as a student, and I'm sure I do it as a teacher, and I'm sure no one's ever told me, so that they don't lose their credits. Let's learn one more brief Mishnah. Shmaya v'avtalion kibla mehem. Shmaya omer, ahov es hamalacha, usna es rabbanus, v'altis vada l'rashus. So, firstly, ahov es hamalacha, love work, value work. Hard work is the way that we accomplish in life. Usna es rabbanus, hate the authority. Here there could be two meanings. One is you should hate the people who are the authority, which is probably intuitive anyway, but here the translation is, I think, more accurate. Hate acting the superior. Especially when you're in the role of authority, you should hate that authority, even if you have it because you need to have it, someone needs to have it, and you're the person who's occupying that position. So you shouldn't enjoy the power and the control over others. That's only a sort of negative necessity, but not something that the person should value or want. And lastly, don't try to get too close to the people in power, trying to rub shoulders with them, to try to influence them. Here it's a little bit hard to know if it means never, or maybe you can do it for positive purposes in advancing the interests of the Jewish community, etc. But don't let that impact on your character, that by making yourself close to the authority, you're sort of valuing this thing of power, which is corruptive when that becomes our central value system.